So there's a skills gap. I mean, everyone will say this. We've been saying this for many years. In the cybersecurity space, we have a 4.8 million. This is just one way of looking at it. 4.8 million deficit in workers that specialize in cybersecurity, which means there's risks that organizations are taking because they don't have the ability to actually staff the resources they need to provide the security infrastructure needed to do what they do. This also means that for the people who are working, because there's such a gap, they're taking on more load and we're burning them out, right? Everyone knows about, the event fatigue that's happening in the SOC, for instance, or, the amount of workload that we're asking teams, especially in the cybersecurity space, to take on. And so that's creating risk. And that risk is a business risk. The one area is the encryption challenges that we know are eventually going to come, because of the quantum imperative, meaning, we've built our foundation for privacy and confidentiality around traditional encryption. That traditional encryption is going to be, theoretically, but in some, examples already at risk. What are we doing today that we can do today to help us address that challenge when it becomes a crisis? And one of the easy things to do, and now we're seeing this being mandated through government requirements and forced policy, is what are you doing about crypto? What are you doing with the post-crypto cipher management? Are you looking at potentially implementing things so that your end-to-end encryption environment, the security that you've built your whole foundation on, from source to the destination, cloud delivered to the endpoint, like how do you protect that? We're moving away from this idea of AI assisted, which I think everyone agrees is not a controversial topic. The idea of using AI to assist in the many things that AI can assist with, whether it's production of media, all the generative AI benefits that we see, the idea of helping us write. Students are using this for research. There's a lot of things that AI is doing today and has been doing for a few years now, where we talk about it as an assistance to the manual process or the traditional way of using IT to do your job or to run your business or to learn or whatever it is you're doing. And now we're talking about moving towards more of an AI native concept. The idea of the economy is now going to be depending more and more on AI as a base part of the infrastructure that we're going to have. To have AI agents be as effective as possible, we need to enable them to do as much as possible, right? If the AI agent can only do certain tasks, then that's assistance, it's not native, because it's not going to be able to run through the full workflow end to end. So you need to enable it to have all of the security capabilities as if it was a human doing the work, but it needs to be done at machine speed and at machine scale. And so this opens up a whole new world of threat. Good afternoon. I have the privilege of presenting right after lunch, which is good because I think the carbohydrate crash is going to be a couple hours more before everyone starts really fading. So my name is Victor Tavares. I'm with Palo Alto Networks. I lead the solutions consulting team facing our customers, talking to our customers about the wonderful cybersecurity challenges that we're all trying to help our customers with if you're a seller, or the solutions you're trying to adopt or figure out how to bring into your environment if you're a defender, if you're a customer, if you're someone who's actually deploying technology in this wonderful world of AI, right? And my talk is called 6 Predictions for the AI Economy. And because it's 2026, it's not really predictions. I mean, predictions, usually when you do the predictions thing at the beginning of the year, it's fun to talk about the 5-year predictions. You can talk about flying cars. You can say really whatever you want, and no one will hold you to it because it's just a prediction. And what I'm talking about today is really expectations, right? It's the things that we at Palo, and I think a lot of other folks who are seriously considering the challenges that AI is creating, are looking at and having to think hard about, because the problems are real, they're here, and we're having to consider how are we going to either make decisions to slow down or jump on and start taking advantage of what the potential for AI is. So I'm going to be basically walking through what a lot of you might think of as obvious, but it's funny because if it's obvious, it's still something that is a struggle and in many cases a resistance, because what we're asking for people to think about is the T word, transformation, the hard thing of making changes in an environment where sometimes change is either not necessarily easy or in many cases not even possible, okay? So first things first, we're moving away from this idea of AI assisted, which I think everyone agrees is not a controversial topic, the idea of using AI to assist in the many things that AI can assist with, whether it's production of media, all the generative AI benefits that we see, the idea of helping us write. Students are using this for research. There's a lot of things that AI is doing today and has been doing for a few years now, where we talk about it as an assistance to the manual process or the traditional way of using IT to do your job or to run your business or to learn or whatever it is you're doing. And now we're talking about moving towards more of an AI native concept. The idea of the economy is now going to be depending more and more on AI as a base part of the infrastructure that we're going to have as this next generation of IT gets tooled up, as the new way of living and working becomes more and more consistent with the way AI is going to change everything. And again, I think maybe 5 years ago, if we said that, it would have been a pretty controversial thing to say because AI was so nascent and ChatGPT wasn't the thing that it is. But I think today we all look at it and go, yeah, I mean, we're all using AI. It's pretty normal now. No one's really saying AI is a crazy fad. But what's next? And the what's next is really the scary, crazy fad part, which is how far are we going to take this AI concept and make it fundamental to what we do? And so it's a new economy. It's a new way of thinking about how things like AI agents, which today still are a concept that either it's a resistance or a careful kind of adoption to, we'll talk about it like we talk about IP today. It's just part of the fabric of what we do. There's this narrative that's changing because of it, which is this idea of an AI-enabled workforce, either because AI is the workforce. When we talk about AI agents and we talk about autonomous systems and we talk about automation that essentially is going to run processes end-to-end with no human element in between, we're talking about that being the new workforce because we're, controversially or not, we're talking about a shift in the way people work and a more of a focus on AI agents as a precursor to what the future is going to look like. And the thing is this, when we talk about 82-to-1, and this is just a recent study that was done, of course this number is going to continue to increase. When we look at an 80-to-1 ratio of work that was traditionally done or activities or events that were traditionally manually processed, whether it was full manual end-to-end or manual intervention, and we're talking about the potential to make it fully autonomous, we're shifting the way we think about the user, we're shifting the way we're thinking about the workforce, and of course we're changing the threat landscape associated with that. Because it's one thing to defend within the risks that you can see, you can manage, versus one that is digital, right? And so this is creating unprecedented challenges from a cybersecurity perspective that you can't avoid. And so what do we need to think about now, today, in 2026? So the first thing is something that I think we all agree is maybe the battlefield for AI, and that's identity. I come from a defender background where we were very focused on the network. We were very focused on the access. We were very focused on the communication going on from A to B, because that was something that was easy to intercept. You put in security controls, you had an idea of where the beginning and the end was, and you can pretty much create policy that was acceptable within a small number of stakeholders, because you could say, here are the applications, can you get to those applications? The identity and all of that was someone else's problem. We didn't actually factor in identity as a primary security control that we were worried about when we were talking about network defense and when we were talking about even application defense. At the end of the day, there's a special group of people who all worked in, those ivory towers around Active Directory and other things that were identity, that was a unique space. And so when you think about what we're seeing now, which is we're in a world where autonomous, and AI agents and the AI assisted turning into AI native, there's going to be an absolute dependency foundationally around identity, right? We're going to go from identity being primarily a human element, meaning we're trying to find the source of truth over who people are and what they're allowed to do, to today, we already see it, but it's going to be much more in the future, autonomous systems interacting with each other and having to identify themselves so that we can then create least privileged access restrictions, enforce policy, or in many cases, just having governance over what's happening. Because we're talking about things happening at machine speeds and at machine scale. And so traditional identity is going to be very challenging, right? And it's going to have to take a lot more of the priority in the way we think about securing our environments as we move more and more towards an AI native priority. And so what does this mean? It means that the attack vectors are new and different. The attack surface is much bigger because now we're talking about not just simplified, centralized ways of identifying. We're talking about identity being everywhere. We're talking about cloud, for example, not being the source or destination of security, but everything cloud has to now be considered as a security challenge, and everything cloud being the enabler of autonomy, being now the new attack surface, right? And so identity is the foundation to all of that because your identity follows you around. We already learned the lessons of identity by moving post-COVID world to a mostly hybrid workforce. And that hybrid workforce is still human beings connecting to resources by having some sort of interaction with identity off of laptops, off of phones, some sort of verifiable source of truth. That source of truth becomes a challenge when you talk about, well, who's the source of truth? Is it the HR team? Is it finance? Is it someone in IT that's going to decide who gets to do what? But fundamentally, it's still a contained problem. How does that work if it's 82 to 1, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1, and we're talking about workflows and dependencies on identity that goes across so many systems? Because that's what AI agents are going to do. And why are we looking at AI agents? Like, we say AI agents as if, that's just a cool fad. But when we talk about AI agents, we're talking about this idea of a skills gap being the reason for us to seriously consider AI agents as a realistic solution to a lot of the problems we're having today. And what does this mean? So there's a skills gap. I mean, everyone will say this. We've been saying this for many years. In the cybersecurity space, we have a 4.8 million. This is just one way of looking at it, 4.8 million deficit in workers that specialize in cybersecurity, which means there's risks that organizations are taking because they don't have the ability to actually staff the resources they need to provide the security infrastructure needed to do what they do. This also means that for the people who are working, because there's such a gap, they're taking on more load and we're burning them out, right? Everyone knows about the event fatigue that's happening in the SOC, for instance, or the amount of workload that we're asking teams, especially in the cybersecurity space, to take on. And so that's creating risk. And that risk is a business risk, right? It's not just risk in the way we run our technology. It's a business risk because we can't be as productive as we could be because there are gaps in the way that we can execute. There's risks associated with the gaps in our ability to actually defend because we are not doing the things that we know we need to do. And of course, then there's a resistance to innovation because you can't take on the same amount of risk that you would if you were able to execute. And so there's absolutely now almost a leading force towards automation and autonomous systems to take away most of the gap that could be done on end-to-end workflows that AI agents can do. For example, in a SOC, it's now very common to have automation around triaging of events. And quickly we're moving towards the autonomous resolution of those events by having workflows that actually will identify, triage, identify the risk, and then run automated processes to resolution with no human interaction. And what that does is it frees up the event fatigue challenges that we're having in cybersecurity in the SOC for those human beings who are doing unique work that still is not automated to go and focus their energy on the higher value return of the work they're doing. And over time, even that's going to continue to evolve as we get more and more autonomous, and AI agents are going to assist with that. This is true across not just cyber. We're using the cyber example because I think everyone in this room can appreciate it, but this is true for finance, this is true for HR, this is true for business strategy, this is true for anything where there's a skills gap associated with identifying the work that's required end-to-end and then having the ability to execute. We're going to see AI agents being one of the more obvious ways to address that skills gap because they will have the ability to operate autonomously end-to-end through those complex workflows. But what that means is we're going to have to think about a new threat vector, which is securing the AI agent. And the securing the AI agent is a new space that we're all learning about, right? There's some obvious practical things that we do when we talk about securing AI agents. Some of it is the traditional ways that we as defenders implement, so security controls, having ways of enforcing policy, forcing the AI agents to still interact with APIs and resources as if they were users. But that is not necessarily an AI native mentality. It's an AI assisted mentality, meaning we're still using AI to go faster, but it's not built for AI, right? And so what that means what does that mean for us? Kerry Frey, who's the CSO at TELUS, he said this in one of our podcasts, and I would recommend everyone listen to it. It's a really good one, podcast called Threat Vector. He was talking about the risks that AI agents, and he called it agents with agency, is going to create. And it's a really great way of describing the challenge. To have AI agents be as effective as possible, we need to enable them to do as much as possible, right? If the AI agent can only do certain tasks, then that's assistance, it's not native, because it's not going to be able to run through the full workflow end to end. So you need to enable it to have all of the security capabilities as if it was a human doing the work, but it needs to be done at machine speed and at machine scale. And so this opens up a whole new world of threat. If you're an attacker, that is the new target, right? Because as we all know, traditionally the human has been the weakness in a security kill chain. You know, you get access to identity, valid identity often because you've phished credentials, you log in as that user. All of the security controls that are in place and all the visibility and observability we have show a valid user doing work, right? And then obviously, you know, if you have something more sophisticated around heuristics and behaviors, you can maybe identify bad behaviors and try to stop it. But if it all looks valid, there's nothing stopping that breach from potentially getting to a point where it has the ability to start doing other bad things in the environment. Now, if we're saying that potential is going to be multiplied exponentially because we're now enabling AI agents to do the work, they're the new workforce, and they're also now having unprecedented access across so many things because that's how you automate. You automate across 5 different systems. So now there's going to be logins that potentially could be exposed across many systems that a human being might not be able to do. And what are the ways that we, as the defenders, are thinking about that problem? Because we're working within a very high technical debt environment around identity. Most identity, infrastructures within most large enterprises has been built over many years and not built to address these new challenges. So this is the kind of thing that if we're serious about securing an AI native potential and the innovation it creates, we got to think about identity. We got to think about how that then affects our ability to do agents. And then by extension, we need to start looking at this challenge around data itself, right? So data is the currency of AI, right? You've probably heard this a million times where it's all about training the models and having, the most accurate data, or the more data you have, the more effective you could be, the more potential the AI gives you. Well, that opens a lot of new risks, as we all know. So data poisoning. So the idea of the data itself not being trustworthy. And we see this already today. We see this with, training models with either corrupted data or intentionally misaligning the data so that you get the results that look valid, and there's really no easy security controls to put in place around the way that these models are working unless you intentionally design it in. That's a new attack vector that's being, today being exploited. And the other things around how you use that data. So you might have valid data, you might have a good model, but the interface to that model, so the way that you inject prompts and get the model to do things that weren't anticipated, or you put guardrails in place, and those models don't necessarily capture every potential corner case associated with what's possible through things like prompting, or things like the actual programming of the use of those models, because the model is one thing, the actual ecosystem around the model is something completely different. And so what that means is we're having to think very carefully about, these wonderful new challenges that create a lot of potential that AI creates. And in many cases, you might not even be able to stop it happening. It's kind of like cloud. In the beginning, we were all very conservative. But as the business cases for cloud continue to grow, it became inevitable that you had to figure out how to get to an effective, innovative use of cloud for your business to continue to evolve. Same is true for AI. And so we need to solve the problem around visibility and observability and understanding kind of how these things are being used. We need to look at how are we thinking about the models themselves and the data associated with the models and whatever, inputs that we need to consider. For example, the data might be good, but the ethics and moral aspects of how that data is actually executing within that model might not be in compliance with the way your organization wants to run. And so you have to start thinking about how you affect that. And then finally, this idea of this starts from the development life cycle all the way out to when it's up in the cloud and it becomes an accessible service. And we traditionally have built silos around how we put guardrails in place and create security controls. That's very difficult to do when you have a code to cloud life cycle for how these applications are quickly getting deployed. And so you need to start looking at what's my security strategy by design. So I'm thinking about this on purpose for when I have developers making potentially security decisions, with how my applications are being developed and then rolled out, because controls are being programmed right into the models, all the way out to it's now in the cloud, I have users using it, I need some sort of security posture management, so I have visibility and enforcement and the restrictions on how those things are being used, and then I can quickly cycle back and continuously evolve. So those are wonderful challenges, but from a security perspective, they're a little bit scary, just because we're still learning about it. And you'll hear from vendors, you'll hear from the market analysts. There's lots of wonderful ideas. Some of them are actually really good and they're being implemented. Others are just thought experiments. We're all going to learn on this journey together. When you talk about risk, you always talk about liability. Lawyers always have to have their piece. And so, as we move more and more into this new world, and as we start seeing more and more risk being taken on because innovation and business justification pushes us in that direction, you're going to see new things happening that are going to set precedents around the legal liabilities associated with what we do. And so, we'll see AI agents that have done bad things and, lawsuits as a consequence. We're going to see potentially new precedents being set on what risk means and what governance means in an AI world. We're going to see insurance companies, for example, start thinking about this problem because they're always playing catch up. And it's interesting to see how this new landscape we're working under, the AI native landscape we're working under, will affect how we think about risk. There's this new thing, I found this actually really interesting. A lot of people are talking about chief AI risk officers, KAIROs. And some organizations are putting that in place as a means to manage the governance and the accountability and liability associated with taking on these wonderful, innovative new challenges that AI creates. But it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. I think that's something that in 2026 will be a big conversation. I think some proactive organizations, some forward-thinking organizations might actually start implementing things like a KAIRO, a CAIRO. Others might be talking about how do we manage this challenge around liability and the risk and the governance associated with it. When we look at one thing that we at Palo have been talking a lot about, and we feel that this challenge that we're seeing around cloud and AI and the imperative to move quickly and more to this dependency is going to force us to have hard conversations around the infrastructure it's built on. The one area is the encryption challenges that we know are eventually going to come, because of the quantum imperative, meaning, we built our foundation for privacy and confidentiality around traditional encryption. That traditional encryption is going to be, theoretically, but in some, examples already, at risk. What are we doing today that we can do today to help us address that challenge when it becomes a crisis? And one of the easy things to do, and now we're seeing this being mandated through government requirements and forced policy, is what are you doing about crypto? What are you doing with the post-crypto cipher management? Are you looking at potentially implementing things so that your end-to-end encryption environment, the security that you've built your whole foundation on, from source to the destination, cloud delivered to the endpoint, like how do you protect that? And a lot of people are like, well, it's not really a big deal, except when you start thinking about the idea of harvesting the data, and the data harvesting is essentially going to be able to be played back later, so there might be things that you need to be confidential in perpetuity. That's no longer a verifiable guarantee, because people could be harvesting data and then 10, 20, 30 years from now have all of that available. So things to think about. Final point, and then I'll wrap up, is we have a new conversation around, let me see if I can get this going. We have a new conversation around the endpoint itself, and if I can go back one, please. Yeah, there. And this is, again, this is now a thing. It's not a prediction. This is absolutely an imperative for 2026. But it's going to be much more of the conversation, which is the new operating system and the on-ramp for a lot of everything that we've talked about, the ability to get access to innovation through AI. A large part of that is going to be interfaced through SaaS. So AI-based SaaS applications, the ability to actually enforce restrictions that are only uniquely possible at the source itself, the interface that the user has, it's browser. and it's going to be browser forever, right? I think that's the new operating system. It's the way that we interface value that is cloud delivered. And so a strong policy and an understanding of what you need to be doing to protect against tool misuse, prompt injections, data leakage, all the things that you need to have, observability to actually make decisions on. That's prior to encryption. That's prior to actually getting it out on the network, which is where traditionally we've been providing security controls. This is the way to do it. And finally, we need to embrace AI. I think AI is going to be much more of an enabler than a risk, but we need to be smart about it. It's something that we need to be intentional about. We need to secure AI in by design. We have to just, accept the fact that AI native is inevitable, is my opinion. It's kind of like cloud. It became fundamental to the way we just continue to innovate and grow. Thank you.